Okay, good evening, everyone. Before we start our meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this evening. We're all in different places, but for me, I'm in Randwick, and the traditional owners of the land where I am are the Bidjigal and Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. So I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners and to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to those of you who are joining us by video or in person. This is the second community meeting for the Essential Medicines Project, and today is the 27th of July. It's 9 p.m. in Australia, in Sydney and Canberra at least, and that's where the bulk of the people in this meeting are from. So present we have Yela Gulumbit, Kimberly Scroggy, Mitchell Blythe, Hung Dong, and myself, and hopefully some people will come along. And we have quite a few things to discuss. First of all, I'm just going to get up the minutes to the meeting, but we'd really like to thank Mitchell for all of the work that he's done in between this and our last meeting, and very, not just lengthy, but very comprehensive blogs and documentation of his work in the project. And of course, thanks to people in our team, such as Yela, who've taken the time to reply and go through that, and Kim and Hung, thanks so much for that. But Mitchell, we really appreciate that. So we have a few things to talk through today. And perhaps the best place to start is with an update on the last meeting's action items. So perhaps, I think, we should go to Mitchell for this first of all, because you've had a lot of action on your items. Would you be happy to share a kind of précis of where you got up to, and sort of a summary of your blog for anybody who might tune into this meeting?
Sure. I'm just reading through it again because I did it about a week ago, so I was just catching up at the same time as I catch. Basically what I did is I contacted people at the ARTG because I needed a way to search through their database in such a way that I could use logical operators. Basically, it doesn't matter, but they directed me to the EBS, which is the e-business service maybe, and that allowed me to do what I needed to do. So I searched for all the drugs that were relevant in stage 1 from the list. That gave me a few more entries than I'd anticipated. That was probably my fault. So we can fix that in the following iterations of this process. And then I extracted a list of unique IDs, and then with the unique IDs, I can search for each one individually using a script. And from that, I can extract things like product names, the strength, the dosage forms, routes of administration, and the sponsor for each of these drugs. And then I went through and I found a few combination therapies that weren't covered by our list, but had ingredients that were individual components of the list, so I kept those. And there's a few pieces of information that we couldn't extract from the EBS. And I think that's largely because we don't store that information, or they don't store that information. I couldn't find anyone that did. Yeah, I guess that's all.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. That's awesome. Perhaps, Kimberly, you took the time to go through item by item of Mitchell's points. So perhaps if you had any questions that remain from that, or that you'd like to discuss, even though they might be on GitHub, just in case anyone catches this meeting and isn't following all of the threads, would you like to summarize, your response to some of Mitchell's awesome progress?
Yeah, sure. So basically everything that we asked, Mitchell did, which is excellent. The data that Mitchell has spoke about that he wasn't able to extract, I think he's right, that I don't think the websites or the databases that we were looking at actually store that information. And I've also had a little bit of a look for one that might be something that we could extract from, and I haven't found anything that's sort of consistent across the board. So there's some websites that have information about generics, but they don't have them for all of the drugs, and it's like it might just be a little symbol that's next to the drug name, and they don't even have that next to all the different drugs that are on it, so we wouldn't be able to find out the information for all of them on that. So I don't know whether that's worth us doing, because we would have to be collecting from different sources and pulling that together, which would be a bit of manpower. So possibly we could automate things like that, but we would have to make sure that we're doing some cross-checking as well on that. The only comment that I'll make is regarding the patents is that potentially if those patents have been applied for as a worldwide patent rather than in a specific country, that information might then also be relevant to Australia as well. For example, we have information on the patents if a drug is still covered under a patent in the US, which is not very many of them anymore, but potentially we would be able to look at that and see if that's a worldwide patent, then that would also cover Australia as well. But again, that's something we're going to have to do manually and check each one individually. I think the only other thing is we talked about whether or not we wanted to collect the information on whether the drugs are approved or not, or the medicines, sorry, which I don't think it's very important for the database per se, but it might be good just for us to have that information. So maybe we have sort of like a list in each country of which ones are approved and which ones aren't, just so that we know which information is going to be missing when we do put this into a database, because it's not going to be complete and that may make things more difficult for us, and just having that information there might be helpful. So I think I did say in my reply to Mitchell that it wasn't really important, but over the weekend I've thought a little bit about it, and I think maybe we should just collect that. Also, it's just a yes or no, so it's quite simple. Like if the information's there, then it's approved, and if it's not, then it's not.
Yeah, I think that would be much more satisfying for somebody looking through the database, because as well, even if I think it would be good if it said that explicitly, you know, is the data missing or is the data not there because it's not approved? Because it's frustrating when you don't know if it's just an empty line of information, rather than there being an explicit reason that the data doesn't exist for perfectly reasonable reasons, you know?
Yeah, and I think it would be fine if we knew we were going to have the information for every single one, and then if it was a blank space, then that meant that it wasn't approved, but that's not going to be the case for a long time. So I think it's best to just have those separate and that be explained well. I think that's pretty much it for that. So
can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course you can.
So is it true that the approval data is collected with the ARTG? I just couldn't find it. That's why it's not in the output files.
So I believe that for a drug to be sold in Australia, it has to first be approved by that, and then it gets placed on the register once it's approved. So if it's on the register, then yes, it's approved. If it's not, then no, it's not.
Okay, great. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I just want to add on what Kim said, and also regarding the approved medicines. So sort of looking ahead, maybe this is a few steps ahead, but thinking of the large database that we're eventually hoping to have. So it will be a database of all the essential medicines, and then there'll be, you know, I guess a few tables or a few small databases linked to each other. So the way that I sort of envision it is to have one list of all the essential medicines, and then the information about those medicines in the different countries. So now we have the US information, we will have the Australian information now, and hopefully many other countries. And then I think it is really important, because then there will be lots of medicines that are maybe approved in certain countries but not in others. So by having that information in the database of the specific country, we'll be able to say and to compare the different medicines between countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that in itself is an important piece of information. Like, we might not know, but it raises questions of why a medicine's approved in one country or not, which I think is an important thing to know. And I'm sure there's some reasons where a disease is not endemic to a certain country, so it's not approved because it might not be needed in that country, for example, but it would be interesting to see how these patterns emerge and what stories that data might tell.
But with that said, I don't think we really need to do anything right now with automation because, I mean, once we have the data, we know that everything that is there is approved. It's just once we insert that into the database, we know that all the others that are not on the list are the ones that are not approved. We just have to remember that going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask Mitchell if there was any way when you extract the data to just have like a yes or no, whether it finds it or not. So then we don't have to go through and say yes or no to each one. I mean, we can do that, and we did do that for the US, but I'm wondering if that can just be integrated into it.
You mean for each active ingredient?
Yeah, so just yes, it found information, and then here's the information, or no, it didn't, therefore it's not approved.
Yeah, that'd be super easy. I could do that in a couple of minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Mitchell. Just want to welcome Peter Rutledge to the meeting. Peter is listening in and isn't going to join us on video, but if he has anything to say, or here he is. I think there are some people trying to sleep close by to his location on Zoom. So Peter might come in with some questions in the chat. And just to let you know, Peter, we're recording the meeting tonight, so
okay.
we can,
sounds good.
Thank you. Keep track of whatever's here. But hello.
Hello, thank you. I'm sorry I'm late.
Don't worry, you're not late at all. I just thought I'd say hello because you're here now, and I didn't know if you'd met Mitchell before, so I thought I'd just say hello.
Hi, Mitchell.
Okay, so I'm dotting around the action, like the agenda a little bit, but I really wanted to hear from Mitchell up top because we were so delighted with everything you shared with us, so thank you very much. Kimberly, do you have anything to add in terms of the first action item here about other sources of info to data mine? Or have you kind of summarized all of that in what I just asked you to follow up with Mitchell?
Yeah, so I did have a little bit of a look and I couldn't find anything. And I shared that with Mitchell on GitHub as well. If I had found anything, then it probably would have meant something, but I haven't found anything. But anyone out there who might be listening, if you do know of any of those places where we might be able to find this information, please feel free to share that with us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kim. Just thought I'd ask, so I'm following all the action items. So we'll whip through to another one. So we mentioned that we were going to look through some examples of compounds for stage 2 for key events. Did we have any progress on that action item just yet?
I don't think we've progressed with that yet.
No,
I think we were waiting to.
So I think we'll roll that one over to the next meeting, if that's all right. Then Mitchell, you've given us an update on ways to automate the data collection. I got a little bit excited and jumped the gun a couple of points. And I think, there's a note here about National Science Week, which we'll come on to in more details. But I think this summary that you've provided is really timely and really useful because we're finalising this week what we'd like participants in the National Science Week event to take part in, or what we'd like them to do. So having this information about what can and can't be automated is really useful. And maybe even having some people who do some checking or cross-checking could be part of the project, but I don't think we'd want that to be the major theme of the National Science Week. And Mitchell, we'd be really happy for you to join any of those National Science Week events, and I'm really happy to talk either online now about those or to talk a little bit online in a moment and then to discuss offline to see if you have any availability or interested in joining us for some of those events.
You can talk about it now if you like.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to go through, we're going to put a pin in that for a couple of action items and then we'll come back to the National Science Week. So the next action item was on me, but as we mentioned, I was going to look at data visualization once we knew a bit more about what we wanted to visualize. So we'll update on that in an upcoming meeting because we haven't quite decided the data to visualize just yet. And then we wanted to do some comparisons between the Australian entries and the US entries to see if we could compare any of this time series or the codes between this information. So I think maybe we're ready to have a look at that this week or next. Would that be a general agreement within the team?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be a really good resource to have prepared in time for National Science Week. That way we can present a more structured database that has more information. And I think that would also be something that would be sort of a baseline for people to start working with that and then search for additional information.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good to me. So we
that
can
is, I think, something that we need to ask some help from the community. So Mitchell, but any other citizen scientists that want to join in this task, I think that would be something that we would really appreciate some help from our volunteers.
Mm-hmm. So maybe should we aim to try and get a kind of mini call out this week for a short, like quite a finite task to compare some of that series of data, or early next week in advance of National Science Week? Would that seem a reasonable way to proceed?
I think so.
And everyone will help with this, but does somebody or a couple of people or a few people want to take ownership of kind of driving that next stage forward?
I'm happy to drive that, but I'm just going to flag that I don't know how to actually do it myself, because I do think we need some coding skills for that. So I'm happy to post it and ask for volunteers and help sort of guide what the vision is. But I will need people to help me to implement it.
If you bring that up as an issue on GitHub, I can have a look at it. I mean, comparing manually 1,500 medicines with another 1,500 medicines would be a bit tedious. So I'm sure we could.
Yes, I don't think it will be manual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can.
That sounds
the data's
good.
already there, so yeah.
That would be really helpful. Thanks, Mitchell.
Yes.
All right.
So Yela and Mitchell are kind of going to drive that part together in a bit of a tandem GitHub approach. Is that all good?
Sounds good.
Thanks so much. Okay, so then we've got a couple more things to discuss in the action items before we move on to some of the agenda items, although they kind of overlap a little bit too. Sorry, I'm just clicking between a couple of screens here. So the next action items kind of, I think they sort of strongly overlap with a couple of the agenda items too. So I'll try and make sure that we cover them all. And if I haven't, please interrogate me and ask us to go back a little bit. But I think we need to discuss a little bit about what the next stages are for National Science Week, and also the ways that we're going to try and share the different chapters of this project. But we might start with a little bit of an update on if anyone's had a thought about where we might be able to share the different parts of this, or where we might publish, or when we might write a blog, or publish something in the conversation, or try to put in a paper or something. Has anyone had a chance to think about this or would like to share any idea with the teams? Any ideas with the team, rather? Not just yet. That's all good. I think we're so busy trying to get the next stage up and trying to focus on National Science Week that maybe we'll come back to that. August, particularly the 15th to the 23rd of August, is a pretty busy week for this project. So maybe we revisit that after we've kind of delivered something really fun and meaningful for National Science Week. Does that sound okay with everybody?
Yes, I agree.
I think we could possibly write a blog that's about what we've got up to so far, and in National Science Week, and post that on the Breaking Good website as well under the Essential Medicines page. That would be a nice little summary for people to read after we've done National Science Week.
Yeah, that would be really good. I think Sydney Science will want to feature something, but we'd really like to celebrate Mitchell's involvement too, and share a little bit more about the collaboration between institutions and individuals as well. I think that's really important. And perhaps we could even aim to write something up in somewhere like The Conversation or ABC or the AXA newsletter or the Inspiring Australia newsletter after National Science Week to give people a little bit of an update about what we got up to, if that sounds good with everybody. Okay, so now on to National Science Week. So this, just as a sort of summary, we're really lucky. We've been supported by Inspiring Australia through a grant this year to put on some activities for National Science Week, which is all online this year. And part of the reasons for the push towards this essential medicines and away from some of our synthetic work has been the switch to online due to COVID and everything that's been happening. So it's represented a really good opportunity for us to share a little bit more about the project online, and also to try and get people involved in the project. So the way we're planning to do this, Mitchell, because we've had quite a few chats within our team today, and anyone who's listening, is we're going to host an event online on the 18th of August, which is a Tuesday. And the event is going to be an hour-long sort of series of mini talks from the team, and then a panel discussion to try and tell people a little bit more about essential medicines and the project, and try and get people to be excited and understand why we care about this issue and why other people should. And they might be able to, well, they will be able to ask us questions and have a bit of a discussion. And then we're going to have a mini hackathon where we try to, for the 2 hours following that talk, get people who were involved, who came along, to see if they want to help us to start the next stage of the project. So to do some citizen science and to join in. And the team will be there in the Zoom room or in breakout rooms there to kind of help people who have any questions or aren't quite sure what they're doing, or want to know a little bit more about how we're going to use the data. There'll be an interactive element to that too. And then on the Thursday, we're going to launch a 12-hour-long hackathon. And of course, the project will extend beyond that time, but we're going to try and set a target, and we've not quite decided exactly what that is yet, but of getting all of a set of information for a certain subset of compounds, or for a certain subset of the essential medicines, I should say, so that we have this kind of idea of working against the clock as a team on some aspect of this project. And as part of that day, we're going to have 1 or 2 school-focused sessions. So we're not expecting everybody in the team to be online for 12 hours. That would be too much. We'd all get exhausted. But I think we're going to take some shift and some overlapping shifts to be in a Zoom room and help people and talk to them a little bit more about the project, so that we meet some members of our community. And as part of that kind of drive around that, we're going to save these talks, share them with the community, and try and make some of them a little snappier with some editing. And we're also going to produce some videos with our now colleague Angie Dowling, who's going to help us to produce these engaging videos for the community. So that's the kind of shape of things, Mitchell. And if you'd like to be part of any of these events, if you'd like to talk for a little bit on the Tuesday, if you'd like to be there to help people for some, I won't even say all of these hours, because I don't want anyone to do all of those hours. We'd love to have you as part of the team.
Cool. I'm happy to help out.
Well, that's great. So
cool.
We'll invite you to our next offline meeting about the event. Don't worry if you can't make it because it's a bit short notice for tomorrow, but we'll let you know where we're up to and share some of our plans with you too, if that's okay. Does anybody else want to speak about or around National Science Week in this particular meeting? Would you like to raise anything that's important?
I think you covered it.
Okay, so then I will go back to the agenda. Sorry, it's trickier with one screen rather than two. So I think we've covered some of these parts, but not all. So we need to think about the next steps and action items, and we have a couple of action items that we've already assigned, thanks to Yella and Mitchell. We wanted to ask quite specifically, and we might not be able to answer all of these things right now, but where we need automation for this project, who can help, what additional resources or assistance is needed, and when automation is not possible, how should we go about this data collection? What might be the best or the most interesting or the most efficient way to do this? Has anyone had a think about this? Perhaps if it's to do with the automated, I think we're all pretty clear that Mitchell's probably the most expert in this area. So maybe we'll start with the question about automation, and then we'll move on to the question about data that can't be collected in that way. So just to rephrase, Mitchell, who could help us to do this? And what additional resources or assistance is needed? And I guess if we need some more help, where should we go to, or how should we try and attract others to join the team?
So I guess to know whether automation is possible is really a question of what the data source is. For example, I had some trouble extracting data from PDFs, and that wasn't because it's intrinsically hard to extract the data from PDF format. It's just that the way that the PDFs are created has obviously changed every, I would say, 5 or 6 years with the ARTG, such that I can look for certain patterns for a certain subset of the years, but then I need to change that pattern for the following years, and then again for the years following that. In cases like that, I was actually speaking to people at the EBS. I sent them a few emails, and they were very happy to help. They were quite clear to let me know that it was outside of their purview, but they were still happy to help. So I guess I would say where automation isn't possible for a particular database, the first people I would go to would be the people that manage it. In terms of who else can help, I mean, it really depends on what needs to be done. If it's public facing information, like if I don't need to interface with the database directly or with a web server or anything, like it's pretty simple to do that, because it's basically just me writing a program that pretends to be human and then it just doing what I would do, but 100,000 times faster and without taking breaks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be the best method for data collection in those sort of public facing instances. Where it's not public facing, i.e. if it's something that you have to extract through some sort of computer program or automated protocol, yeah, you'd probably be better off asking someone that manages it.
Okay, yeah, it's really helpful, Mitchell. So perhaps it's a little bit of a case of seeing what we can get and where we can't, and then sort of writing a list. And again, just to be clear to anybody who's following this or who might be watching, we're not at all seeking to hack any information. We only want to get to information that's legally accessible to the public. So just in case anyone comes across this and wonders what we're up to, I think it's really good to be clear about that we're only trying to access data that we're able to access, but just to put it all in one place, so that people can have this information.
I guess the distinction I'm making is between, to be clear, it's between something you can type into a search bar versus something that you would need to write a program to extract explicitly.
Yeah, I followed you, Mitchell. I just thought I'll just be explicitly clear, because I wouldn't want to encourage anybody to do something that we really weren't asking them to do. So
yeah,
that's why I thought I'd just mention it. Sorry, Yela, did you have something?
Yeah, what I wanted to say also is that the places where we are trying to automate the data are from sort of official websites. So places that we can, trust the information, that we know that it's a reliable source. So there are probably other websites that have information, but it's important to sort of check the reliability of the data before we collect it and insert it into our database. So also that's part of the things that Kimberly has been working on to find what the sources are that we should be using for the automation and for collecting for our database.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we might have...
Sorry, go Alice.
No, go on, Kimberly, please.
I also just wanted to make a point about what Mitchell was saying, how the PDFs are different every so many years. So one of the reasons we want to do this is because information like that is so scattered. And the idea is that we're able to bring it all together in one place in a consistent format and with standards and quality, bringing in what Yayla said, we're taking from official websites and that type of thing, like bringing all that public data together so that it's in one place for people to access, so they're not on the hunt for a million different things that are all in different formats on different websites. So, I mean, it's a pain in the bum that you found that, but that's also the type of thing we're looking for, and how can we make that information more accessible to people? So, that's obviously something that's not so easy to automate, or we're going to have to do different iterations. But yeah, that's the type of thing that we want to know about, because that's sort of the information that we want to collect and bring together to make it easier for people to have access to it.
Yeah, definitely. And the sort of thing we want to keep a note of too, so that when we do share a publication or we share any information, we kind of have a record of, the things that were relatively easy to somebody with your skills, Mitchell, those things that were a little bit maybe not difficult, but more steps or more frustrating because of some nuances in the way you had to collect that data or the scripts you had to write. So it would be really good to try and make sure we don't forget about, some of these things, which is kind of comes back to our former point of writing some of these things up at different stages. Even if they're in blogs and they go towards a paper, it means we capture the things we were thinking about while they're fresh, I guess. So that's a really good point, Kim. Thanks so much. So then maybe to the second part of this question, where we can't automate, what might be the best method for this data collection? How can we ask members of our community, citizen scientists, to do something in a way that's the most satisfying, least frustrating, that how much instruction do we want to give? How much freedom do we want to give? Does anybody have any perspectives or thoughts on that? I know Yayla and Kim and Hung, you've thought about this in the stages that you've been writing up, but any reflections or perspectives on this?
Yes. So my first is the first stage we launched in the US, which Mitchell then helped us automate. We actually had a lot of people participate in that previous, so we had over 100 entries. It was very well structured. It was sort of like, check this, and this is what we're looking for, enter it into the box sort of thing. The second stage that we've then started to run has been very free. It's sort of, these are the things we're interested in finding out more information about. Go onto the big World Wide Web and see what you can find. And unfortunately, we haven't had quite as many people participate in this. So Yayla and I have had some discussions about how we might scaffold this and break it down into smaller tasks, because it's quite big. So I think one of the biggest things that we have learned is to keep the tasks smaller. Maybe 20 minutes is sort of like enough time in each session. And also to do have some scaffolding within that. Like, don't just ask people to go out and just have a look around and see what they find. Just give a bit more direction within that. But we also had the discussion about possibly putting something onto the Breaking Good website that's like, have you seen something or read something interesting about essential medicines recently? Like, let us know. And it can sort of just be like a comment thing, and they can just add that in, and then it gets sent to us so we can record that information as well. Just, yeah, that's a few reflective pieces from what we've done so far. Yayla, do you have anything to add? Because we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, so I was just sort of taking inspiration from ecological citizen science projects, and there are various ways where you can collect ecological data. So I guess the best way is to actually like go outside for a set period of time and say we're monitoring birds. So actually monitor every single bird that you see and the numbers and the species and every single thing. But that's very complex also, and you need a certain level, also skills and also knowledge, and you need to know how to identify the different birds. So there are a lot of skills that has to go into being able to do such a task, and it's also quite time consuming. So I sort of think that that big task that we ask people to do is maybe similar to that. But in ecological projects, you also have something that's more opportunistic. I'm sorry, I can't say that word.
Opportunistic.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically you go out, you see a bird, you see, oh, that's a beautiful bird. Why don't I click it on my app? So that's something that is very instant. People, just, happen to see something, happen to find something, and then that information is also very valuable. Or people go outside and say, oh, there aren't any birds. And as we know, no information is also, or a zero is also a result. So I think taking sort of inspiration from those kinds of citizen science projects, which are much more well established than the kind of projects that we're trying to do, but taking some of those ideas and trying to implement them in this project. I think that's sort of the next step, and that's what we're aiming to do going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So back to sort of Kim's idea of, you could almost have, if anybody reads anything about a medicine, they could share that, and then we could find out. Somebody else could say, does it have an essential medicine in it? So, to find out if it's linked to this, that would be sort of the more opportunistic one.
Exactly.
And I guess the other thing is that for ecological studies, there's sometimes we need to find out a little bit more about what people's extrinsic or intrinsic motivations for joining a project like this might be. So for ecological studies, if people are really, if they're birders, or they're really into their, frogs or their local environment, or they're going out for a walk anyway, it might be something they can do as part of their, their normal routine. And when we're asking people to take a step that's outside of their normal routine, we need to really respect that, but also find out what would motivate people to do that, or what do we need to tell them, in a really honest way about why this is important, so that it becomes more motivating or more interesting. So maybe that's for us to think about a little bit, how we can be a bit more creative as well as a bit more scaffolded, if that makes any sense.
Yes, definitely.
Any other ideas or points on this point, or are we still kind of mulling this over and trying to experiment a little bit with our next stages?
It's perhaps a little bit technically challenging, but one of the things that I really enjoy about both ASCA and also Digivol is the fact that you get a profile and you can see the things that you've contributed to, and they count how many total transcriptions you've done, or they give you email notifications about how the project has progressed because of your input directly. They also sort of collect metadata about which, in the case of birds, like which birds you've identified.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's particularly difficult to do something like that, but some sort of acknowledgement record.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
a really good point, Mitchell. And maybe that kind of ties into some questions we might have for you, or some questions in terms of the grant we mentioned that we're putting in about the databases. In some ways, what you're generating there is a sort of mini database on the people who are building the database with their consent, of course, so that they get the attribution and the acknowledgement. And we've definitely talked about in the team having more comms so that people know a little bit more about what's happening, and we're working on that. But I really like this idea of the profile. We just have to see how we can set this up with the resources we have, but in a way that's still meaningful for people, if that makes sense. One of the things that we had on the open source malaria project, and it's still there, which was set up by Cloud City, who are our I don't quite know how to explain exactly what they're a software company, but also they worked on the project and they built a platform, like a landing page, and you can see kind of on that almost like a leaderboard of who's done the most on GitHub. So it's directly linked to issues or comments or activity on GitHub, so it just pulls that information from there. So we could have a look and see if we could do that relatively easily, and I can investigate, how they do that, or if they'd be willing to help us, or how much we have to pay for some help with some of those things. But any suggestions as to how we could kind of nudge things along that direction would be really gratefully received. Okay, so should we have that as an action item for everyone to try and think a little bit more creatively about how we can implement some of the ideas that Mitchell mentioned, or to try and make the next stages more engaging or more interesting for people who are giving their time towards this project?
Yep.
Okay, so I think we've covered all of the items on the agenda apart from the any other business, which is good because we've got just under 15 minutes left. So does anybody have any other business that they'd like to raise? So I guess I have one, which is to do with the grant application that we mentioned, and just to say that Mitchell will share a draft of that with you, maybe via email or maybe on GitHub. We'll decide how best we think to share that, but we'll send that to you this week. So it would be great if you could drop me an email with your email address so we can share that with you. And see what you think about that, or if you'd like to be involved. So we're trying to see if we can get some funding for helping us to build this database into a meaningful and sustainable and continuing source of information. So we'll update you on that via email or on GitHub if we decide we can share the application publicly. I guess we have to have a think a little bit about that. So that's
I'll just comment. So all of the EOIs for this application are getting shared publicly, I believe, anyway, so that other people who are also applying can join together. And if there's people working on the same sort of idea, then they can work together to try and build it. So I'll double check that.
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure, so it should be okay.
If that's the case, and if that is the case, and maybe even if it isn't, maybe it's best to put it up on GitHub and to share things openly and see if anybody wants to make any suggestions for that EOI or to join as part of the team. That would be really good. So we'll try and share that tomorrow, Mitchell, if not at the latest early on Wednesday, because it's due on Friday. But it's a very short EOI at this point.
Cool, that all sounds great.
Okay. Does anybody else want to say anything else before we draw the meeting to a close, or to make a plan for the next date of the meeting? Do we meet before or after National Science Week?
I think we just have to get an update about the comparison of the databases, but I think we can do that just between ourselves on GitHub and just offline. I don't think we need a community meeting for that, so I suggest we meet after National Science Week.
I would second that, unless we realize we do need to meet, in which case we can also meet for a shorter meeting or at a more a friendlier time, seeing as we're all in the same time zone, so we can work that out. And I would maybe suggest, if we want to keep it as a Monday evening meeting, which we can discuss, perhaps we don't meet the Monday straight after Science Week, but we give ourselves just a week's grace, and we meet the following week. So the Monday after Science Week is, I think, the 24th of August, because it's the first day of semester at Sydney. So it wouldn't be that date, but 7 days from then, so the week after.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep, sounds good.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Hung, for taking minutes. We really appreciate that. And thanks once again, Mitchell, for all you've done. And we'll see you on GitHub pretty soon. Okay.
Indeed.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'll stop recording.
Bye, everyone. Good night.